Hey guys, I apologize. I didn't send it last night. I forgot to. So I'll send it now, and I assume whoever is giving the second Dvar Torah, which was meant for today, will send it a bit later. I want to make just a point about both last week's Haftarah, or this week's if you're in America already, the Haftarah of Parashat Korach, which discusses the story of Shmuel bringing the Jews to Gilgal to solidify or reincarnate Shaul as king. For those of you who need a refresher on Shoftim, Shmuel, after the Jews request a king and a bit of back and forth, and Shmuel not being so supportive of the idea, God tells him to listen to the people despite the problematic motivation in having a king. But even after Shaul is appointed king, there are those who are hesitant, but after a successful military victory, people fall in line, and Shmuel takes that opportunity to solidify Shaul's kingdom and reflect on his own leadership. Parashat Chukat discusses Yiftach and his discussion, his ascent to power, and his discussion or diplomatic conversations with the king of Ammon. And what I think is fascinating in both conversations is the use of history. And Shmuel, when he is taking an accounting of his the years of his leadership, as well as trying to make the Jews understand where they have made mistakes, where they have spiritual flaws, and attempt to encourage them and persuade them and inspire them not to make those mistakes, he invokes history. And he goes back to Moshe and Aaron. Vayomer Shmuel el ha'am Adonai asher asa et Moshe ben Aaron v'asher la avotechem eretz Mitzrayim v'atay tiyatzvu v'shavta etchem v'nei Adonai et kol tzidkot Adonai asher asa etchem et avotechem. Remember what Hashem did to Moshe and Aaron when he took you out of Mitzrayim. Remember everything God has done for you. Kasher ba Yaakov Mitzrayim v'zaku avotechem al Adonai v'shlach Adonai et Moshe ben Aaron v'yutziu et avotechem Mitzrayim v'yashivum b'makom hazeh. When you called out to God after you had been brought to Mitzrayim at the time of Yaakov, and Moshe and Aaron saved you, and then he jumps forward, and then he skips to the period of the Shoftim. ויזעקו על אדוני ויאמרו חטאנו כי עזבנו אדוני ונעבוד את הבעלים והשטרות ואתה תצילנו מיד אויבינו ונעבדך. And then he basically summarizes the Shoftim cycle, that you would cry out when you were oppressed, God would send the shofet, you would do tshuva, there would be peace, and then after a few decades of peace, so then you would begin to sin again and worship Avodah Zarah, and God would send an enemy again, and you'd repeat the cycle. And Shmuel uses this to motivate them and says, "Im tiru Adonai v'avatem oto ushmatem bekolo v'lo tamru et pi Adonai v'yitem gam atem v'gam hamelech asher malach aleichem achar Adonai aleichem v'im lo tishmu bekol Adonai meritem et pi Adonai v'yitay Adonai bochem u'va'avotechem." If you listen, so everything will be good with you and your new king, and if not, it will be terrible. And here, Shmuel invokes history, both to remind the people of their mistakes in the past, the consequences of those mistakes, and the benefits of following in the path of Hashem. In the Haftarot of Chukat, you actually get a machloket about history. The king of Ammon turns to Yiftach and says, the reason I'm fighting you is because when the Jews left Mitzrayim, you took my land. And therefore I'm coming to take it back from you. And Yiftach responds and says, that's not what happened. You are selectively remembering history. It's true that the Jews beat you and took your land, but the reason was because we asked from the king of Edom, we asked from Sichon, we asked from the different kings in the area if we could pass in peace. And instead of passing in peace, all these kings came out to war, and we had no choice but to defend ourselves. In the process of defending ourselves, so we got land. And therefore, you were the aggressor, not us, and you can't now flip it on its head and use that as justification to fight us. And I think that it's fascinating that the sentiment that seems to have been shared, not just by Yiftach and Shmuel, but by Ammon, is that the way that we live in the present has to be informed by our past. In the case of Shmuel, it's meant to both motivate us not to make the same mistakes of the past and to pick up on the things that we did right and try to mimic that, to copy that, to follow on that path. And that will assure success. And in the case of Machloket between Yiftach and king of Ammon, you see a second aspect, which is not just the importance of looking to history to guide us and prevent us from repeating mistakes and to encourage us to follow the things that worked, but you realize that as beneficial as it can be to learn from history, you need to be careful, because there's always a danger of remembering history selectively, not in a way as Shmuel has it, which is going to help us work on our own character development, but rather in a way that will allow us to weaponize the information against others and forget our own flaws, forget the role that we may have had in mistakes. And what Yiftach responds to the king of Ammon is essentially, yes, it's important to remember history, but you need to remember it holistically so that you learn the right lesson and you don't just use history for confirmation bias, to basically have an agenda and a narrative that you want to push and then find a selective interpretation of history to justify it. And I think that these lessons of the importance of shaping our present based on the lessons we've learned from the past, but to do that holistically and to remember our own flaws and the things that we did right, and use both to inspire and not pick out those that allow us to be overly righteous and convinced of our own path and weaponize it against others is important to remember, both in our personal lives and as I watch the news, both of what's happening in America and in Israel, as Israel grapples with how to deal with this possible peace deal on the table. And so much of the machloket is about how do you interpret history and how do you look at the stories and history in a complete fashion. And in America, where people are grappling with the history of racism and the like in America and figuring out what lessons we're supposed to learn and the exact proper way to utilize those lessons moving forward, it's important to remember, as Yiftach says in this week's Haftarah, that whatever lessons you do draw, they need to be taken from a complete perspective of history, and to remember that in the end of the day, the lessons that we learn from history and from our own mistakes are often the best ways of ensuring that our present and future will be as perfected as possible.